that the movement with growing up milk, that we should have special formulas, and that is also influencing lower income countries a lot. I think that's a bad one. I had a question on wind food and the comparison. It was a randomized study, and we don't think that the average diet was different between the ones. And I think the reason that we saw more anemia compared to the other one was just that there was no micronutrient fortification, and perhaps the iron availability in the spiders, which was pretty high, was not as good. So that's something which should be looked into more.
For the question on, or the comment on snacking, I think it's a good point. I mean, for a child to snack is a good thing. It's a source of energy, it's a source of nutrients. But the question is then, what are they snacking on? In terms of studies, I'm not aware of any studies looking at healthy snacks specifically during the complementary feeding period. If anyone is aware of any, I would love to hear them. But in terms of older children, there's been research on iron-fortified biscuits and things like that. And you know, in this data, we looked at a range of commercial foods that were fed, and they could include yogurts, cheeses, other foods that are commercial that could be a healthy snack, depending on sugar levels. But the consumption rates of those were minimal compared to these snack foods. So, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I think we are just about to close the session. I just want to bring in our keynote speaker and the chief guest into deliberation and discussion. You remember one of the keynote speakers, one of the speakers said in the morning that he spoke about the inclusive growth. And somebody said that, you know, there can't be one size fitting, you know, all the situations. So what I'm trying to say here is, the first point is, look at the prevalence of stunting, especially in South Asia I'm talking. In lower quintile it is 59%, in higher quintile it is 25%. So in lower quintile it is 2.4% times, you know, higher than in the high quintile. Secondly, if you look at the reductions in stunting, if there has been 42% reduction in the higher quintile, it has been just 14% in the lower quintile. So I think while we deliberate in the next 3 days over, you know, over the malnutrition aspects and especially complementary feeding, I think we need to keep this into picture and how best we can work out some strategy in that. The second point is that I think ample evidence is available to say that if you look at the stunting, I'm quoting stunting because the data is available, and say that 50% can be attributed to the maternal causes, whether it is the poor adolescent nutrition or poor maternal nutrition. I think that is the key. But, you know, 50% again is attributed to the young, you know, infant child feeding practices, including complementary feeding. So I think that is one thing. I think our focus is going to be on the complementary feeding assets. The third point is about the complementary feeding. We know that when the complementary feeding starts at 6 months, look at the infection list, unhygienic practices leading to infections, diarrheal and pneumonia deaths. And look at the under 5 mortality, then the maximum mortality, which is about 72% plus, you know, it happens below the age of 2 years. So ultimately, these are the unhygienic practices which really make a difference. And secondly, while, you know, we are introducing complementary feeding, the child or the baby also starts, you know, crawling, creeping or moving. So ultimately, you know, he also or she also tends to, you know, catch the infection. So these are the two important factors, because complementary feeding again becomes difficult because of these two factors. And lastly, you know, IYC, we always say it looks very simple. We always say it's very simple to do. Anybody and everybody can do. I would say it is very difficult. It is a science basically. And it just can't really happen, you know, the way we are thinking. So I think we know what needs to be done, but I think there's a lot of, I would say, knowledge gap. You know, look at the communication gap. The mother doesn't know actually. Believe me, even, you know, we as parents, we did not know about this. That I'm talking about 20 years back. But I think this information needs to be spread. It needs to go across, you know, nook and corner in each and every part of the country, and especially to the lowest quintile, you know, populations, because ultimately these are the poor resource settings where these babies are, you know, becoming stunted or wasting, then ultimately dying. So thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you so much, Professor Kim, Melissa, and friends, for your wonderful, you know, presentation. And we look forward to further. Over to you, Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, chairpersons, and thank you once again, our distinguished speakers and participants. So we'll break for lunch now, and I look forward to welcoming you back at about 2 p.m. for the next session. Enjoy your meal.